Welcome to Speaking Holistically, the podcast that explores the power of alternative medicine, natural healing, and homeopathic solutions to help you achieve true wellness. Each week, Dr. Jen and Amy G dive into the world of holistic health, discussing researched, time-tested remedies with expert insights from Dr. Jen, as well as real-life stories from patients to empower you to take charge of your health. So if you're ready to embrace a more natural path to wellness, let's start speaking holistically, because true healing begins from within. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Speaking Holistically. I'm your co-host, Amy G. I have my amazing co-host here, Dr. Jen, and we're doing a Family Health Hub episode for women, and we're talking about Pap Smears.
Yeah, we are. Super fun. So we're just going to go through the logistics of this and look at it logically as opposed to emotionally. So I always have felt that this is personal, but I've always felt that our cervix was shoved way up there because it's not something that should be touched, scraped, futz with, stuff like that, right? Doesn't need to be cleaned. It's a self-cleaning organ, all sorts of stuff. Now, that's not to say that people don't take care of themselves enough, maybe, or they have a pre-existing condition or a genetic predisposition towards something that could create an issue. In that case, obviously, you got to take care of yourself. But for the average woman, I'm giving some information that maybe will make them make different choices for themselves. And, you know, it's not going to go along the lines of a Pap smear every single year, potentially, which actually the ACOG, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, actually recommends a Pap smear and or an HPV test based on age and individual risk factors about every 3 years. So it's not an annual thing. And in fact, if you don't have a family history of something, they've often have stated every 5 years. So they potentially feel the same way, that maybe we shouldn't be scraping cervixes every single year and creating an inflammatory response. They also said that if you're 65 or older, screening may be discontinued if there's a history of adequate prior screening and you've had 3 consecutive negative Pap smears, or 2 consecutive negative co-tests which is a Pap smear and an HPV test in the last 10 years. So it's interesting, though, that women have been vaccinated against HPV still need to follow the recommended screening guidelines. So apparently that doesn't help decrease your cervical cancer risk, which is what we've all been told. But by the recommendations, it kind of sounds like that's not the case, right?
Yeah.
Also, women who have had a hysterectomy may still need screening if they have a cervix. So that's something also to make sure that you know. If you have had a hysterectomy, which is your uterus removed, right? Well, actually, that's actually what it is. An oophorectomy is having your ovaries removed. So there's a little bit difference. We use the word hysterectomy for like all of it, some of it, you know, that sort of a thing.
Yeah.
But the hysterectomy is when the uterus is removed. Now, if they removed your uterus and left your cervix, then having that screened, obviously it's still there. If you haven't, you're basically done with a gynecologist. But of course they'll say, no, you still have a vagina. I'm like, okay, well, if you got something going on, obviously go in and get that checked out. One thing that I found interesting is that the Pap smear tool is coated in a chemical called ethylene oxide. And it's what they call a versatile chemical primer used in the production of other chemicals, which is like a precursor to chemicals. A chemical is a precursor to a chemical, particularly ethylene glycol, which is antifreeze. It's a sterilant, so it sterilizes whatever it is. In this case, the Pap smear tool for medical equipment and supplies that cannot be sterilized by heat. So a lot of the Pap smears have been done, and I don't think they're done that way anymore, with metal, so that they would be able to reuse them and they would sterilize them with heat, right? Extreme heat to kill off anything. But now they're using plastic and stuff like that, which that's a whole nother conversation in itself with all the microplastic exposures and stuff. Mm-hmm. But it is coated in ethylene oxide. Now, what's interesting is that if you look on the websites for the Pap smear tools, they'll say that it's perfectly safe, it doesn't cause an issue, it doesn't cause cancer. But if you also look at the EPA's website, where it talks about exposure to ethylene oxide, it says that it is carcinogenic to humans, and it says by the inhalation route exposure. So, evidence in humans indicates that the exposure to ethylene oxide increases the risk of lymphoid cancer and for females, breast cancer. Now,
Oh.
is that just with inhalation, or is that repetitive exposure to a mucous membrane that could potentially be absorbing a little bit at a time? So I'm not making that claim. I'm just saying these are things that you might want to consider looking at and deciding what you're going to do and what your exposure is going to be.
So I have a question. I mean, based on this information, what could women do if they're like thinking, well, I want to get my pap smear. Maybe they do move it to like every 3 years, but they can't control the speculum, the plastic speculum that's used and things like that during their exams. So what kind of options do they have? They can't tell the doctor to use some different chemical on the tool, for example.
Well, it's true, but like I'm sure in other countries too, and I'm not saying fly to Ecuador to go get your pap smear, but they probably use the autoclave. They probably heat it to very high temperatures so that it's thoroughly cleaned. And that would obviously, I would think, obviously be a safer option. Anytime you're not exposed to chemicals at any point, and yes, it's not very long, it's not sitting there, you're not inhaling it, it's not like they're pouring it inside you, but we don't know who's going to be impacted by this, and what they say is safe one day is, I mean, we saw that back in the 60s and 70s with thalidomide, and babies were born with no arms or arm buds or leg buds and stuff like that, and these moms were told it was perfectly safe. So until the physical manifestations showed up, they're like, oops, sorry. So I always say that things are safe until they're shown to be not safe. So, as far as that goes, I don't have an answer for you, but I've always said least exposure to anything that could potentially be damaging is like the right choice. So I don't have a microwave at home, and I'm not dumb enough to think when I'm going to a restaurant, they're not sticking something in a microwave, so I'm limiting my exposure to something that I don't think potentially is safe. Yeah. So I'm not saying don't ever do it, but at the end of the day, I don't want people going into things and not having enough information, like know what's happening,
Right.
The ACOG is saying every 3 to 5 years basically, and you're going in every year because your OBGYN is telling you to come in every single year based on what?
The recommendation that came from who knows where. I mean,
yeah, and it's been like that for at least 20 years that I know of, that it's been every 3 to 5 years. So if they tell you, okay, come back in a year, and they come back in a year, and it's like, well, wait a second, like you don't have HPV, you're with one sexual partner, your risk factors are low, then maybe listen to the ACOG, maybe they know something, which is why they're saying every 3 to 5 years as opposed to annually. So, just something to think about, something to do a little bit more reading on and decide what your actual risk is and what you want to do about it and how you want to proceed. You could go every 2 years. You don't have to go every year. If something comes up or you're promiscuous or, having the time of your life and, I don't know, and you've got multiple partners and they've got multiple partners, then, that risk factor is probably a little bit higher than somebody who's been married to their husband for 50 years and they're intimate every 8 months or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like, it's really about your risk factors, right? Of what's happening and who you're with and what you're doing and all the other stuff. So I just want women to have that information to realize that you don't have to just go along with whatever you're being told, but you want to actually make some educated decisions and choices based on actual information. And like I said, that ethylene oxide, I'm not saying that it's going to cause anything. And really what they're talking about is an inhalation. But at the end of the day, if you can inhale it and have an issue with it, then what if you're going across that cervix, scraping a little bit off of there, creating basically a wound? I don't want to call it that, but you're irritating it and taking layers off of it. And that ethylene glycol is getting deeper into that tissue at maybe a more increased rate than obviously it would if you weren't scraping across there, if you were just touching it perhaps,
Yeah.
So something just to think about.
Yeah, and I guess from the patient's perspective, I would just give people the advice of like, you don't have to go every year just because you're told you have to come in every year. You don't have to go just because your doctor says you should, and that's recommended in your annual wellness exam. Insurance is getting billed for that. So there's an incentive there, and just think about it that way and go, maybe I'm okay to go every 2 years or the 3 to 5 or whatever. It's just, I think it's just an individual decision, but just feel like you can make the choice yourself.
Well, and I mean, the other thing is a lot of these people just keep getting incessant phone calls from these robocalls, right? From their insurance company going, hey, it's now time for you to do this. It's time for you to do this. And they're like, oh my gosh, shut up, already.
Yeah.
So, so they'll just go in just to get them to shut up. And so, like, really, I just don't want people to go, well, I didn't know, I had no idea. And I want to say, yeah, I know you had no idea. So that's why I try to do these podcasts to give more information. Am I telling you to not ever do a pap smear again? No, I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying, like, here are the guidelines that the ACOG is giving you. Why are they saying every 3 to 5 years? Is it because they have seen increased cancer risks in pap smears every single year? And a lot of the OBs will tell me, oh, no, we're not scraping it. I'm like, how are you getting the cells? Oh, we're just swabbing it. And I'm like, now, ladies, if you've ever had a pap smear,
That's not swabbing. That's not swabbing.
no, there's no nerve endings in the cervix. I'm like, lie to me again. Because let me tell you, we all feel it, right? So
That is not a swab.
so
No way.
you can tell me all you want, but my cervix tells a different story. So yeah,
My cervix says ouch. That's what my cervix does.
yeah,
So that is
exactly.
not a swab.
So that being said, just do your due diligence, decide what works for you, decide what your actual risk factors are, and you can absolutely talk to your OBGYN about this. I don't think there's anything wrong about having, physicians who are on your side and checking things out, but at the end of the day, like just start looking at things a little bit more critically and logically as opposed to being afraid of everything,
And
that's why I said
just following orders, right?
yeah, fine, following it blindly for sure. But like I said, I'm not saying that I don't want, tons of hate mail from people going, oh, it doesn't do anything. Well, no, but 20, 30, 50 years from now, we're going to be like, oops, sorry. So I just want everyone to know, like, that's what's on the end of those speculums, on those pap smear tools. And like I said, maybe in other countries they're still using metal and autoclaving those and cleaning them that way. But here we're using plastic again. So you've got the plastic exposure, the ethylene oxide exposure, and how much is too much for each individual's body.
Yeah, great point. Well, thank you, Dr. Jen. This was very informative. Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you haven't joined our school community before, I'll put the link in the show notes below. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks until next time, everybody. Bye-bye. That wraps up another episode of Speaking Holistically. Thank you for listening. We hope today's conversation gave you new insights and inspiration to take charge of your health. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, be sure and join the Speaking Holistically school community by clicking the link in the show notes. There, you'll get access to daily podcast episodes, weekly live Q&As, educational content, and so much more. You can also connect with us on our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, be well, stay curious, and keep speaking holistically.